From the CISO series, it's Cybersecurity Headlines.
Evasive phishing mixes reverse tunnels and URL shortening services. Are passwords finally dead? And the lasting damage of ransomware. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's Cybersecurity Headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and definitely some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Upendra Mardikar, the CSO at Snap Finance. Upendra, great to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And of course, before we jump into the conversation, I want to thank our sponsor as well, PlexTrack, the must-have platform for CISOs. Remember, you can join us on LinkedIn Live every Friday, 3:30 p.m. Just go to CISOseries.com, look for the Weekend Review page. You can find the link there. Join in on all the fun. But we're not going to wait for you because we've got about 20 minutes, so let's hop right into it. Our first story of the day, evasive phishing mixes reverse tunnels and URL shortening services. Security researchers are seeing an uptick in the use of reverse tunnel services along with URL shorteners for large-scale phishing campaigns. The practice deviates from the most common methods of registering domains with hosting providers. With reverse tunnels, threat actors can host the phishing pages locally on their own computers and then route connections through a URL shortening service, generating new links as often as they want to bypass protection. So I guess my question is, first, is this a new technique, or Upendra, is this something you've seen before? And second, how would you go about fighting this?
Yeah, so Anti-Phishing Working Group has written a paper on how attackers use URL shortener services. And they specifically talked about how HTTP 301 redirects could work. So it is not unknown to the industry, Richard. So,
Mhm.
it has been, quite popular or quite known to the industry. As we think about it, there are two themes, right, as we can take about from this story. One is attackers will continue to find different ways to phish.
Mhm.
Second, abuse of these legitimate services like reverse tunneling services and URL shortening services, they will continue to do that. So how to solve this? That is a very interesting question. Industry has been fighting this particular problem for quite lots of years, right? Attackers try to phish organizations and population in general. So it's not about just organizations or firms, it's about the people. The global population, Richard, is 7.9 billion. Out of that, 5.1 billion mobile users are there, 4.5 billion users that are on social sites, 210 million emails per minute are being sent. So, with such a big addressable market, if you will, that these attackers have, they will continue to phish people. And it's important to take the steps for this and future generations to have security culture, security mindset. What we need is secure internet right now and secure emails, text messages, just like we try to do HTTPS by default with HSTS. We need something for at the email level, at the text level.
All right, our next story here, LastPass and Apple go passwordless. No, really. Pairing two of this week's stories together, LastPass, the password manager app, began rolling out the ability for its customers to use its own authenticator app to access their password vault on the desktop rather than simply using a master password. This catches up with the authenticator and biometrics that it currently offers in its mobile app. So now you have passwordless options effectively to access your vault kind of wherever you're at. At the same time, at its Worldwide Developer Conference earlier this week, Apple announced it plans to launch passwordless logins across Macs, iPhones, iPads, and Apple TVs later this year. Users will employ FIDO-compliant digital keys created using Touch ID or Face ID, and these will sync across user devices using iCloud Keychain rather than being stored on servers. It's kind of well-known fact, or I guess common wisdom, that everybody hates passwords and kind of seen as an Achilles heel in security. Basically, since their inception, we've known that that's the lowest common denominator of security there. I'm curious, Upendra, what are your feelings about the shift to passwordless that we're seeing not just from Apple and LastPass, but Microsoft, Google also kind of getting on board this FIDO train?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So the platform providers like Google, Apple, Microsoft, and others. And you mentioned about Fido, fantastic, lots of awesome and commendable jobs these guys are doing to get rid of the problem that has been haunting the industry called passwords, right? So one of the popular references, Richard, that you might remember was for the passwords was in Alibaba and 40 Thieves, right? I mean, it's a very famous folk tale
Oh
that you
yeah.
might have heard about it. And, this has been long way over there. That was the password to enter the cave. And, the funny thing was, the passwords was compromised couple of times in that story, so one by Qasim and another by Alibaba himself. So this problem of compromising password is not a recent one, right? I mean, it's the old problem. There are two sides to the coin, Richard, as I think about it, right? One is the back end and one another is front end. So on the back end, what I mean by that is the entire internet, when internet was coming in, if you go back, it was basic HTTP authentication. I still remember configuring that for authentication, and it was based on passwords. So there are still several websites even now that are still using this basic HTTP authentication. And Fido and passkeys, they have a big task because the backend, they have to cater to Fido and passkeys and other kind of passwordless journeys. And from the front end perspective, right? So I talked about the back end. On the front end perspective, ultimately the browsers, they send username and password. So WebAuthn, the W3C just announced 3-4 years ago. Great work by W3C over there. We have to uplift browsers as IoTs, as we go into the omni-channel experiences, as we go into the metaverse experiences, and inching towards Web3 and distributed world, having that ubiquity and omni-channel, changing across channels, all these passwords is going to be an uphill task. Um, in my opinion, omni-channel password managers still will be required, in my humble opinion, till the foreseeable future.
Well, at least Open Sesame is more secure than ABC 123. So at least it seems like we've gone backwards. So if as challenges are remain, and yep, I agree with you that in that broader, in that macro sense, like there will still be passwords that exist in the world. From a user friction, right, and like counting on the laziness of people just wanting the path of least resistance. I do think these are incredibly significant steps. So good to see everybody, kind of the industry getting on board with standards. Always fun.
Yeah.
Next up here, critical flaws found in Unisoc chips. Checkpoint research documented these Stack Overflow vulnerabilities impacting Unisoc Tiger T700 SoCs found in recent budget Motorola phones and other kind of low-end electronics. These flaws resulted in the phones skipping checks to make sure that it's reading a valid subscriber ID when connecting over LTE. The end result is this could open the door for a denial of service attack. Checkpoint alerted Unisoc in May, and Google plans to release a patch in its next Android security bulletin. Sounds like a problem that, it denial of service. I don't know. Seems like it's flying under the radar a little bit. Could blow up to something much more dangerous. Seeing something like threat actors do anything from social engineering, SIM swapping, already kind of a scourge. I could see this being used as a vector for that. Upendra, I'm curious on your thoughts on these.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Social engineering, SIM swapping, this reminds me of, there were, a couple of years ago, Richard, you might remember this Meltdown and Spectre,
Mm-hmm.
right? Intel 86 processor had very similar kind of vulnerabilities, right? So there are five things, while I was reading this story that came to my mind. So first is ubiquity of low energy and less expensive bill of material. So, all these chip makers, when we are looking at the hardware, right, they are going to, look at the least expensive option, less expensive options, right? So the problem is not just with the Motorola phones, it is going to be an industry problem. And as we see more and more IoT devices coming in, they will have similar problems. Patching at the hardware level and firmware level is not easy. The second thing is, like you said, cyber criminals, nation state, they're going to leverage these kinds of vulnerabilities. And the third
Yeah.
thing is, yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah,
Well, I was just going to say to that point, even
yeah,
when you're talking about again inexpensive hardware, even if there are mitigations, firmware mitigations, who knows what the rollout of those looks like? Because usually those are the exact devices, whether you're talking about IoT, whether you're talking about cell phones or kind of across the board, that are the least likely to get any kind of extended support. Thankfully, Google in this case is putting out an Android security bulletin, but I mean that
yeah.
feels like the exception.
No, that is a very good point, and thank you for that asterisk over there. And just to extend what you are saying, right? The patch management, which is an industry problem. Again, how do you automate the patches, and especially when you are talking of the end devices, and as well as on the servers, right? I mean, I'm combining this story, which is more on the consumer side, to the meltdown and Spectre, which is on the server side, right? I mean, or even on the end devices, right? So, how do
Hmm.
you do the patch management? And then, we need to think about zero trust. I was at RSA. Zero trust is one of the things that everybody is talking about. How do you secure users? How do you secure devices, networks, applications, the data, right? And both on the consumer side as well as on the server side, how do you secure this entire ecosystem? And if there is a breach, or if you suspect that something is fishy, you throw that particular server or that particular device out from the ecosystem. So we need a zero trust ecosystem. And a corollary to that is supply chain, right? I mean, we have seen that with solar winds, and there are lots of supply chain initiatives that industry is trying to harden it. How do we go ahead, create a zero trust ecosystem, make sure that there is a right hardware root of trust, and also strengthen the supply chain? So there are those five thoughts, that come to my mind when I was reading this story.
All right, well, before I move on, we got a meaty second half of the show. Can't wait to get to it. But we have to spend a few moments and thank our sponsor, PlexTrack. The best penetration tests begin and end with PlexTrack. PlexTrack can improve efficiency and effectiveness at every phase of your proactive assessments. By centralizing the data from all your automation tools, cataloging important reusable content for easy access, and promoting communication and visibility at every phase of an assessment, PlexTrack cuts reporting time in half and adds value between reports. Check out plextrack.com/CISO series to learn why PlexTrack is the premier pen test reporting and management platform. All right, our next story here: cyber attack takes Palermo offline, and we're still waiting on any kind of resolution or updates to this. So this is definitely developing. Bleeping Computer reports that the Sicilian city of Palermo in Sicily, the fifth largest city in Italy, has been shut down for over 3 days due to what may be a ransomware attack. While the operators of the Killnet hacking group previously threatened Italy with cyber attacks, the group has typically used DDoS attacks in the past. Palermo's counselor of innovation, however, said all systems were shut down and isolated from the network. This is behavior more consistent with combating ransomware, so the relationship there may be unclear. In the meantime, all of Palermo's services, including its police, can only be reached by fax or phone. Tourists and traffic have also been obviously impacted by this. We were talking about this last week with Steve Zalewski of Defense in Depth, all about kind of the possibilities of these threats from Killnet, and this may be related to that. Again, we're not 100% sure. Seems like we're opening up, though, a huge Pandora's box for cities and countries, regardless of such threats become real or not. Everything must stop or be prepared to stop in case of an attack hits like this, kind of go back to paper, as it were. This, of course, is nothing new in corporate cybersecurity, but Upendra, I'm curious, what are your thoughts regarding its potential and real power it seems to give threat actors here?
Yeah, and you are right. I mean, that we don't know whether it is a DDoS or a ransomware.
Hmm.
Either way, time will tell. Killnet is more known for its ransomware, but we will see.
Hmm.
So based on the news, and we also had a very similar kind of pattern with Costa Rica recently, right?
Yeah.
With Contact Group. Uh, you know, Obviously we don't know the motivation, but it could be one, those countries, those governments that are siding with Ukraine, and then or just overthrowing governments, or just financially motivated. We don't know what the motivation could be. Another pattern, Richard, that I was seeing is that both Palermo and Costa Rica, well, Palermo is a city, and Costa Rica is a country, but more than that, these are very heavy tourist destinations, and majority of the revenue come from tourism. We don't know what the implications GDPR and whether these are like I was saying ransomware or DDoS. But one thing is for sure that it's not yet time for us to throw away those good old fax machines. It's not throwing them away is a prudent thing to do.
Yeah, when ransomware hits Japan, they will be well prepared. They love their fax machines, so they'll be ahead of the game there. What's remarkable about me with this whole with both Palermo and Costa Rica is, I mean, we're not that far removed from when ransomware felt, I don't know, in some way exceptional, like an exceptional event, and it to not just go from commonplace in business operations, but to see like nation states being like
Hmm.
significantly
Yeah,
impacted by these events is and just to kind of the acceptance of that as being like, well, we got to be ready for it.
yeah.
Seems to me like it is such a rapid escalation. And we will have to see as more details come out. Regardless, whether it's DDoS or ransomware, this is definitely, to your point, a denial of tourism
Yeah.
attack at the end of the day for a lot of these for a lot of these destinations. So we will obviously keep it tuned to cybersecurity headlines for all the latest as we learn more about that. I'm sure we'll be covering it quite a bit. Next up here, lack of reporting hurting the ransomware fight. CISA's executive assistant director for cybersecurity, Eric Goldstein, said this week that the severe lack of ransomware incident reporting in the U.S. or to the U.S. government is hampering its ability to both protect organizations and retaliate proportionately to ransomware gangs. He makes the case that more consistent and comprehensive reporting would let CISA share indicators of compromise and outline unique infrastructure characteristics of ransomware families. Excuse me. So the current administration, of course, has been quite proactive in trying to establish new or at least improved security measures across the board. And to the prior administration's credit, too, I mean, CISA did really ramp up under the Trump administration as well. So it seems like, obviously a long-term goal for the government here. So do you think companies should step up and report, or would this run counter to their vested interests, such as brand reputation, share price? I mean, does disclosure go against the best interest of shareholders at times? That's the weird thing I'm coming across here, right?
Yeah, no, you're right, Richard. Now, this is a news, right, that we should not roll our eyes at, in my
Mm,
opinion. So we need industry to come together to solve this. And, I've been personally involved in certain, industry forums and industry initiatives to take care of these bigger problems. And you're absolutely right. We have to really understand why companies are hesitant to share this information. It will affect their brands, stock price, reputation. How can we address that first? So when I was reading these stories, this particular news, there are three things that stood out to me. First, we need to address the problem, Richard, that you were talking about. How can industries or the firms or the organizations can share this particular information without any ramification to the brands, the stock price, or reputation? How can they share indicators of compromise and indicators of attacks, and so that nobody can use that information? If I'm volunteering and sharing that information, it does not become a big point of abuse.
mhm,
Secondly, let's talk about technology as well, right? We cannot ignore technology and automation. How do we do it? How do we share that information in an automated fashion? So, taxi, and sticks, these are the two standards. Sticks essentially is structured threat information expression, is a standardized language, right? I mean, developed by MITRE and OSS, CTI Technical Committee. Brilliant work that these guys have done. And then there is something called taxi as well, which talks about how to do it, and whether it's a hub and spoke model, source subscriber, peer to peer. So there are multiple things actually over there from the technology perspective. Just to add a little bit more color to technology, can the vendor community, all right, be it under the framework like NIST, cybersecurity framework, ISO 27K, vendor communities like XDR, EDR, SOAR, SIM, you name it, are there automated ways where they anonymously or pseudonymizing it, can they go ahead and share this information without any ramification? And can the ecosystem and the industry come together to solve this problem by default? And the third one is the process, right? So what's the process to share this information? How repeatable it is, how consistent it is, how uniform it is for the entire, all the companies to participate in sharing this information, and so that we all can win together without again being afraid of brand reputation or any hit to the shareholder value. So creating that assurance model, Richard, for that is absolutely necessary. I keep saying, and I'll say it over here, the security community needs to come together, and security is a community sport.
Yeah, that's a really great way to kind of wrap our head around the challenges, and then kind of approach it as an industry, right? Rising tide floats all boats. Kind of another way to look. But I like that it's a community sport. I like that. That's bring us all together. Bring us all together. That's what we need. All right, and our last story here: paying ransomware paints a bigger bullseye on a target's back. On the other end of the ransomware issue is what happens after. New ransomware numbers from Cyber Reason's April survey show that 80% of ransomware victims that paid their attackers were hit a second time. According to the report, in addition to being hit again, the data encrypted by criminals often became unusable during the decryption process because of corruption issues. So, Upendra, you pay up, you become a hot target as a result. Kind of makes sense. Thieves know their way around your systems already. Probably some of the vectors that they got in is either open to them or other attackers as well. But then there's the issue that the data that comes back is broken, which, as anyone who's ever migrated a database knows, super easy. All the DBAs are just holding their heads right now thinking about that. So this proves that cybercrime gangs don't make good business partners, turns out, at all, which might sound like common sense, but also flies in the face a lot of the, hey, pay the ransom, that's the cost of doing business approach we've seen with ransomware and cybercrime in general recently. I'm just curious what your take is.
Yeah, I mean, you are absolutely right, Richard. It's a natural tendency, not only for human beings, right, but also for animals as well. Wherever there is a reward, they go and flock over there. If you drop, I mean, just to give you an analogy, if you drop a few grains of sugar on floor, you'll see ants appearing from nowhere and going after that sugar, right? So very similarly, if you give and if you pay a ransom, they know that these guys are paying ransom. So that is something to think about. Firms have multiple attack surfaces, right? I mean, if the security posture in one area is weak, the chances that the security posture in the other areas are more or less also weak, right? So, considering this, paying ransom should be considered as a last option, in my opinion, even if we consider that as an option. So, consider not paying ransom. So, we have to, as an industry, discourage and disincentivize attackers. That is just absolutely we have to do as an industry. So, they go after money. And just like, every human beings will go after money. And if they find a soft target, they are going to go after that particular target. So it is just common sense, like you said, in my opinion as well. So another thing to consider is, again, how can we come together as a community, work with law enforcement to solve this problem, which is an industry problem right now. So many companies are getting hit with ransomware. So working with law enforcement, working with cyber insurers, working with the community to solve this industry pandemic. Again, we have to secure the ecosystem. Hence, I keep saying security is a community sport.
All right. Well, before we get out of here with those words of wisdom, Upendra, was there any story that was a thumbs up or an eye roller for you? Just something you reacted strongly to in today's lineup?
Yeah. So again, Eric hit the nail, right? I mean, we have to somehow or the other, industry has to come together to, empower each other. And, so that's why lack of reporting hurting the ransomware fight. That story really stood out, and it's a thumbs up for me. And I would say security is a community sport. So let's join together.
Well, thank you so much, Upendra Mardikar, the CSO at Snap Finance. Super appreciate your time, your expertise, your wisdom throughout our entire rundown. Where can people find you if they are so inclined to follow your stuff? And most importantly, are you hiring?
Absolutely. So you obviously are very welcome to come and find me on LinkedIn. That's where you will find me. And second thing is we are hiring. Snap Finance is a fintech. It's in the BNPL space. So, absolutely cool company. So looking forward to, working with you guys and connecting. And yes, we are hiring.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you, Upendra, once again. Just some really fantastic stuff today. And of course, thank you to our sponsor, PlexTrack, the must have platform for CISOs. Before we get out of here, just a reminder, next week there will be no Super Cyber Friday because instead we'll be hosting the live final episode of the competitive pitch podcast series, Capture the CISO, with your host, Jonah Till Johnson, the CEO at Nemertes. We have 4 amazing contestants and the competition will be fierce but fun. It starts at 1 p.m. 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific next Friday. You can register to attend this live show by going to the Capture the CISO page at CISOseries.com. We will, of course, be back with another week in review show starting, as always, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. And finally, you can still get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines. That's every single weekday, 6 minutes. We'll get you all caught up. Until next week, I'm Rich Straffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.